I'm going to start out with the typical water in a cube simulation. One of the things I noticed that when doing these simulations that the water likes and tends to stick to surfaces, so I haven't really found which setting keeps that from happening, but I don't really like the water sticking to surfaces when it's clearly at a good angle, and that water shouldn't be sticking at all to this surface. And once I was done with the water and the cube simulations, getting a feel for it, then I went ahead and just put a regular character in the scene to interact with the water using MDD files to drive the animation or the motion of the character. Here I did this one because I wasn't going to wait for the render or look in the view render to see the particles, how they would look. The particles look good in the preview, but when they're rendered out, I don't know, they're kind of lacking. But again, I haven't done a whole lot of experimental with the spray and the foam particle simulations. This here took about 2 days to render. I left the default settings in Blender to render this scene. Little to my knowing that you kind of don't want to do that. It's a 64 tile, and when I render with CPUs. I have a small render farm to handle the CPU bandwidth to render scenes out fairly quickly. Not as fast as the GPU, but it does what I need it to do in a fairly decent amount of time. I use a lot of this guy's methods in his tutorial, CG Geek. He covers some pretty basic fundamentals to get you started with water simulations inside of Blender. I thought it was a good starting point for me to do some basic experiments, nothing too crazy. And here in this render, again, at the time when I was rendering it, I left it all to the default settings. So when it started rendering, it was just hauling and it was just kicking those frames out. But as the liquid got more dense, the render times got longer, and I was getting like maybe 2 frames a day. So you'll see an area where it's got the color screen where I kind of just stopped and watched some other videos from other YouTubers on render settings and what can be tweaked to have better performance out of the renders. So here's the render with tweaks. Renders got way better. And here I'm kind of trying to understand the fluid simulation and how it interacts with motion inside of Blender. The default settings are kind of nuts. Maybe good for a box or a simple water simulation where you have everything extremely reactive to motion so you can see the cool water simulations. But when you get down to a character, those settings seem to be not good enough. They're way too hyper. So there's a lot of iterations of me playing with settings in this scene to finally get it to something that I like. And once I'm happy with the iterations, you should see a final render. Then I went back to the original one. So this is kind of how I wanted it to be to begin with versus the water splashing down on the scene. And that's it. I hope you liked my simulation test. If you want a tutorial or a deeper explanation into the settings that I was using and tweaking, definitely put a request or a comment on this video. Otherwise, I'll just make more water videos without going into any of the settings, because there's definitely things that I'd like to review into the spray and to the foams, because I've seen a lot of simulations with the water in Blender where the foam never really dissipates or dissolves or disappears. It's just there and it gets bigger and it overwhelms the water, which foam shouldn't be doing that. I don't know if it's an issue or just, like I said, I haven't gone over the settings to go through to see if there is something in there to dissolve the foams versus just having the foams overtake the water surface.